And it was more so like, oh, I'm feeling claustrophobic and I have mommy issues. There's quite literally no one asking me to do this, but I just have too many opinions about the things I read in March, so I want to share them with you. And if this video feels a little more chaotic, it's because it's going to be, and that is because I'm slowly descending into madness with my work life. So I think what you can probably expect, just so we can manage expectations early, is that each video between now and like end of June is gonna just get increasingly more and more chaotic as my sanity declines as I continue to write my thesis. Because I'm also revising 2 scientific manuscripts and trying to apply for jobs, and I don't know where I'm gonna be in the next few months. So chaos is ensuing, and sometimes you just gotta give yourself to entropy and just let it happen. I'm gonna try and continue to make these videos. They're a nice little creative outlet, but we shall see. My work life is definitely getting pretty spicy. It is heating up. But that's not what we're talking about today. What we're talking about today are the books that I read in March. So the first book that I read in March was The Deep by Nick Cutter. And I had pretty high hopes for this one because I read The Troop in January. Time is meaningless. I don't remember. I think it was in my January wrap up. Really liked The Troop. Yeah, so I was like, cool, I'm gonna be a Nick Cutter stan from now on. But I didn't really like this as much as I was hoping. So The Deep is basically about, there's this strange plague decimating the world called the Gets, where you slowly forget how to do things until eventually your body forgets how to, like your heart forgets how to beat, and so you die and you succumb to the disease. But there is a new substance found at the bottom of the Marianas Trench, which is the deepest part of the ocean, that seems promising. Like it could have applications for a lot of different medical treatments, like cancer, and they're hoping that it could be used for the Gets. There's a small team of scientists that are sent down into the trench, and then horror ensues. So I was really going into this hoping it was going to be more like deep sea horror, because I have a very healthy fear and respect of the ocean. I think the deep sea is very terrifying because it's largely unexplored and we really don't know what's down there, you know, and the stuff we do know that's down there is freaking scary looking. So yeah, I was really excited, but it ended up being a lot more psychological horror, which I understand. I think like being down in the deepest part of the ocean in this base would be really psychologically taxing and, you know, claustrophobic and all of that. So I understand including some elements of psychological horror, but it was just kind of like, it was more so about the individual characters like confronting their past traumas and like how they were, like their mental state was declining while they were there. And it really wasn't so much about like the horror of the deep sea. Yeah, it wasn't what I was wanting. But I don't think that makes it objectively bad. And a lot of the book was like flashbacks of the characters' pasts before they're even in the trench. I don't know, it might even be like half of the book is like, doesn't even really, you're not even in the trench. You're like in a character's past or hearing about their past. So it's just like, man, I wanted to like go to the Marianas Trench and like get my shit rocked by a Cthulhu looking thing, you know? That's what I was really wanting. And it was more so like, oh, I'm feeling claustrophobic and I have mommy issues, which is fine. I mean, I think if you like psychological horror, you probably would like it, but for me, I just was wanting something different. I will say, if you're looking for deep sea horror and sort of like what's down there, you know, what's gonna get us, you know, is there something down there? You should really watch the movie Underwater. I think it was from 2020. It has Kristen Stewart in it and some other people that are famous that I can't think of off the top of my head. That surprised me how good that was. That was pretty good. If you're like me and you're like, yeah, let's do like horrors of the deep sea, watch that movie. Don't read this book. I will say I did really enjoy the ending of this. So I'm glad I stuck with it. There was like a point where I was like, this is just like all psychological horror. It kind of became a slog. So I thought about just not finishing it. But the last 150 pages really saved it for me. And like, that's what got it up to a 3.5 out of 5 stars. The last 150 pages were really good, but I was wanting more of what was in the last 150 pages to be throughout the whole novel. And that just wasn't the case. There is a lot of body horror. And definitely, I would say skip this one if you can't handle animal cruelty, because there are some pretty graphic depictions of cruelty and death of animals. I always include a link in my videos or in the description of my videos of a website that you can use to check different like forms of media for trigger warnings, spoiler free. It's called doesthedogdie.com. So I always include that in my description, and I'm going to include it here too. I mean, basically everything I read has trigger warnings. So definitely check that site if you have any content, you know, that you try to stay away from. So yeah, I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. Next I read, which this was a reread for me, Threats by Amelia Gray. I have talked about this extensively on my channel. I listened to this on audiobook in February, and then I reread it in March, a physical copy, because I wanted to annotate it. So I talked about it in my February wrap up, and then I actually did a separate video. This is my underrated literary thriller. So I talk about this. I do have some spoiler sections, but they're marked, and then I do a full annotated flip through if that's something you're interested in looking at. But for those who don't know what this is about, I'm just going to go through this really briefly because, like I said, I've kind of talked about this a lot. But this book is a literary thriller by Amelia Gray. And the synopsis is kind of vague. It's like, David's wife is dead. At least he thinks she's dead. And the whole book is like him trying to figure out what happened to her, why she had to leave. And if that kind of sounds confusing, like why would he not know how his wife died or why his wife died? That's kind of the whole thing. It's really cryptic, and there's a lot of exploration of grief versus mental illness. So I freaking love this book. I love it. It's like one of my favorite books I've ever read. It's so freaking weird. If you want to hear more about it, look at my February wrap up. Look at my underrated literary thriller vid, because it's really good. So you should read it and or listen to it on the audiobook. Okay, I'm done. Okay, the next book I read was Penpal by, oh god, what's his name? Dathan Auerbach. I meant to look it up the pronunciation before I started recording, but here we are. Didn't look it up. So I'm going to say Dathan Auerbach. Probably butchered it, so sorry if I did. But Penpal is an older book, I think from like 2012, and it started as this collection of like short interconnected creepypastas. And I love creepypastas. That's just like a subgenre of horror that I think is really creepy and effective. The gist of the book is like, how much do you remember about your childhood? And it's this guy who's like thinking back to things that happened to him in his childhood that now as an adult thinking back, he's like, oh, that was scary and like not okay. Basically, there's just like a lot of these bizarre tragic occurrences in his life, and he weaves the story and tells you like how they all end up being connected and how he ended up being where he is today. And I was honestly blown away by this. This was really freaking creepy. It really captured that uncanny, spooky feeling of the woods. Specifically for me, I have memories of like playing in my grandparents' yard, and it's surrounded by all these woods, and the woods have sort of this like magical feeling to them during the day. But then like as it would transition to like the sun was setting, I would always get kind of like creeped out by the woods, and just like they transitioned into these sort of like ominous, dangerous place. So I feel like this book really captured that feeling of this boy growing up, loved playing in the woods, and he was very proud of the fact that he knew the woods like the back of his hand, but then like creepy stuff starts happening at night, and it's like, I totally get that feeling. I totally get that feeling, because the woods at night are freaking scary. This was also my first time reading a horror novel where the point of view for a lot of it was from the point of view of a really young child. So he starts out telling us about when he was a kindergartner, and all this creepy stuff starts happening. But what made it really creepy is that since he was a kindergartner, he couldn't fully fathom like what was happening. He couldn't fully process how the things that were happening to him were actually scary and like unacceptable. Obviously, I'm reading as an adult, reading that these things are happening to this kindergartner, and it's like, you as the reader know like, that's not okay. That's freaking creepy. That's scary. So then it was like another layer of horror in that like, you knew more, and like you almost wanted to like reach in and shake the kid and be like, you're in trouble, you know? So yeah, I thought it was really bold to have the young child be the one that's the victim of these occurrences. Yeah, this is one I will definitely be purchasing for my personal collection because it was just phenomenal. It blew me away. It was really, really creepy, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Okay, the next thing I read was a short story collection by Amelia Gray called Gutshot, which it just has such a pretty cover. And I love Amelia Gray's writing. Ever since Threats, I was like, I need more Amelia Gray in my life. I did annotate this as well, but I ended up not liking this as much as I was hoping. I'm just gonna read you like the synopsis. It says, a woman creeps through the ductwork of a quiet home. A medical procedure reveals an object of worship. A carnivorous reptile divides and cauterizes a town. Amelia Gray's curio cabinet expands in Gutshot, where isolation and coupling are pushed to their dark and outrageous edges. A master of the macabre, Gray's work is not for the faint of heart or gut. Lick at your own risk. Yeah, I feel like even just from that synopsis, you can tell she's a freaking weird writer, and she has a really weird writing style. She writes about weird shit, and I just love it. So even though I didn't as a whole really enjoy the short story collection, it was still just such a treat to read her writing, because she's just a master, in my opinion. It's just a joy to read her writing. My favorite from the collection, my favorites were Western Passage. That was probably my all-time favorite. 50 Ways to Eat Your Lover, Gutshot, the titular story, that was also really good. The Swan as Metaphor for Love, and Christmas House, which Christmas House was really funny. And that's another thing, like that synopsis sounded kind of ominous, and like there's a lot of creepy, macabre things that she writes about, but somehow Amelia Gray is able to make her writing effortlessly funny too, so I would still recommend this. I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars, but I'll probably keep this and I might revisit some of my favorite stories, because yeah, her writing is just a treat to read. Next, I read young adult horror, which is a genre I don't have a lot of experience with, but the book I read was Horrid by Katrina Leno. It follows a high school girl following the death of her father. Her and her mother move back to her mother's hometown on the East Coast. It's sort of like her struggling with that transition, and her mom and her like mother's side of the family has a lot of secrets. She didn't really know her grandma before her grandma passed away. Another aspect is that the house that they move back to is sort of like the family house that her mother grew up in, and it has this reputation in the town for being haunted. So it's sort of her adjusting to this new town, uncovering the secrets of her family's past, and realizing there are a lot more sinister things in her family's past than she realizes or ever knew. It again is another exploration of grief versus mental illness, but also possibly, you know, there possibly might be supernatural elements. I mean, first of all, it has a really gorgeous cover. I read this, or I actually listened to this on audiobook, so I didn't read a physical copy, but gorge cover if you have the physical copy. I would say this definitely explores grief, mental illness, and generational inherited trauma and the horrors that come along with that. But I don't know, the characters were pretty one-dimensional and kind of meh, in my opinion, and the story as a whole was kind of forgettable. I just really wanted it to be grittier and more horrific, but I think that that's just me wanting it to be adult horror, and it's not. It's young adult horror, so that could probably just be because I prefer adult horror. I would say it's still a pretty decent read, and the audiobook wasn't bad. It was just, yeah, kind of forgettable, so I only gave it 3 out of 5 stars. The 6th thing I read was Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo, and wow, okay, first of all, let's do synopsis. So this is about a girl named Galaxy, or Alex Stern. She's recruited to Yale even though she never finished high school, and she like is not the typical like yuppie Yale like Ivy League type person. She dropped out of school. She like has a background in drugs. She's from like a poor life. She didn't even apply. She quickly learns that she is recruited because there's more to Yale than, you know, meets the eye, and there are actually these secret magical societies. So she sort of gets sucked into this world of the Yale's secret magical societies. I don't want to give away too much, but basically chaos ensues. So, my thoughts. I was shocked by how much I loved this. Like, I freaking loved this. I honestly thought I wasn't gonna really like it because I wasn't sure how much I was gonna like dark academia. I thought it would be kind of young adult, you know, so I was a little worried it would just be sort of meh for me. But dang, this was so good and I really liked it. Oh my gosh, I was so shocked. Yeah, it definitely was dark academia, but it had such a hard edge to it. So reading this after Horrid, whereas Horrid I didn't feel like was gritty enough, this was like gritty. It was like, we're freaking going there. Like, we're gonna kill people, we're gonna threaten people, there's gonna be violence happening. Like, we are doing it. I'm normally not a huge fantasy person. I like fantasy when it's like dark magic, and I also really enjoyed that this felt more grounded in reality. I mean, obviously it's magic, but you know what I mean? Like, it was in a sort of like modern setting. There was a lot of information about Yale's secret societies, which obviously they're not actual magic societies at Yale, but there are actual secret societies at Yale. So it's kind of cool that it like played with that, and it's obviously a real location. But what I think really like sold me on this book is that I loved the main character. Like I don't think she's like a character that I have felt, oh man, I'm like my words. I don't know if I've ever felt so connected to a main character. I felt like hesitant to say that because that feels like such a commitment, but that's what my heart is telling me. My heart is telling me I've never felt more connected to a main character. I loved her. Like she's from a poor background. She's a woman of color. She has like a drug-riddled past. She is the most unlikely character. She is an underdog. I love an underdog. She kind of is like the chosen one trope a little bit, which I am such a sucker for. Starting out, she really tried to like be this new Alex and like try to like blend into Yale. But the more she tried to blend in, it just like wasn't working. And then like finally she gets to a point where she's just like, fuck you guys. I am who I am. I'm doing it my way. And if that means I have to knock some heads on the way, I'm gonna freaking do it. And I was just like, hell yeah, sister, do it. Knock some heads. I want to see you do it. Yeah, I don't know. I just love it. She's violent. She's badass. Like she makes a threat and then she backs it up. It's not an empty threat. It's like, I will mess you up. And if you don't comply, you're gonna get messed up. And I was just like, cool. Yes! She's just like a huge FU to the like white, upper class, Yale, yuppie, academia culture. So it was just a joy to read. Just a joy to read. I loved her so much. This was more of a mystery than I was expecting, but that was a good thing. I really enjoyed how twisty-turny it was. It kept me on my toes. I wasn't able to guess how things were going to end up, and like every time something would happen, I would just be like, I did not see that coming. I thought the characters were really well constructed. I mean, obviously I just ranted about Alex, how much I loved her, but even the like secondary characters and like the super like minimal, like they're only there for like a couple pages characters felt so fleshed out and multidimensional and real, and I cared about them and like what they were doing and what happened to them. Some complaints I've heard about this book is that it's kind of a slog to get through in the beginning, just to get through all of the world building and learning all the different magical houses and the new fantasy magic lingo, which I kind of agree with. I did start out listening to this on audiobook and it was too difficult to keep up with everything, because I kept being like, okay, wait, who's Lethe? What's that? Where is this? What is that location? That is one con of the audiobook, but one pro of the audiobook is that there was two narrators. So there was a narrator for Alex and then a different narrator whenever this other character, Darlington, would be the one narrating. So I thought that was kind of cool, and the audiobook quality was really good. But I just think this is a book that it really helped to have the physical copy. So I ended up stopping listening to the audiobook and I started reading the physical copy because I wanted to be able to flip back to like reference, like, okay, wait, what is Lethe? I need to remember what that is. And then the physical copy also has a map. So there's like a ton of different locations. So whenever they were like bouncing around to all these different places, it kind of helped to be able to look and be like, okay, that's where they are, and sort of visualize. So I kind of see what people mean when they say it's a slog to get through at the beginning. But if you can get through that, bro, you should do it, because I freaking loved this. Yeah, I gave it 5 out of 5, and I can't wait for the sequel to drop in January. Okay, what did I read next? God, I'm getting kind of sweaty. Okay, next I read A Certain Hunger by Chelsea G. Summers. It was pretty fine. So basically this is about a food critic named Dorothy Daniels who obviously loves food and she loves traveling, but one unique thing about her is that she is a psychopath. This is sort of a mock memoir written from the point of view of Dorothy, looking back on her life and the choices that she's made. Yeah, like I said, it was fine. It was like pretty fine. I think the writing was really good. Chelsea Summers is obviously, you know, a very talented writer, but I don't know. I just feel like the story didn't do a ton of new stuff apart from the psychopath being a female. Dorothy Daniels is a pretty stereotypical psychopath. You know, she kills people. She's a food critic. She likes cooking. So yeah, she's a cannibal too. She's basically just like a female Hannibal Lecter with worse manners. I really couldn't help but compare her to Hannibal Lecter. You know, there was just like too many parallels. And I just feel like there wasn't really a lot of new stuff. It's like she just liked food, having sex, Italy, and then like killing and eating the men that she had sex with. So it was like it was fine. I think what kind of maybe turned me off too is like some parts were kind of spicy, and I'm not a huge like sex scene person. So I was kind of just like, okay, here we go again. I will say the scenes of gore are pretty good. Wanted there to be more. There were more sex scenes than like gore and death and stuff, so I don't know. I do love stories about women behaving badly, and this definitely delivered that. I just wish that Dorothy Daniels felt more distinct, which I think it's like, it's hard. It's hard to have like a psychopath, a cannibal psychopath that's like, you know, likes really fancy cuisine. Of course you're going to think of Hannibal Lecter. So I think it is difficult because it would be hard to distinguish her from him, but I'm sorry, that's just all I could think of, and it is what it is. Okay, the last thing I read in March was the Doloriad by Missouri Williams. This is a literary horror novel that came out this year in March, so this was a new release. And I've talked about this a little bit. I talked about it in my California reading vlog. That's where I read it and finished it. But for those of you who don't know what this is about, it takes place in the wake of an environmental cataclysm, so the Earth is no longer really habitable. There's a small group of survivors who have clung to survival by resorting to incest. They're all pretty depraved and messed up in their own ways. They're led by this matriarch, and the matriarch rules them and they follow her and just do everything she says. But then she claims to have this vision where she thinks that there's this other group of survivors. So she offers up one of her daughters to sort of like marry them, but then the daughter returns the next day, and that's sort of like a bad omen, and it sort of signals to the other members of the group that maybe the matriarch isn't as all-knowing and wise as she claims to be, so they really start to doubt her, and then cracks in, you know, the hierarchy of the group start to form. So I had really high hopes for this, you know. I'm getting more into literary horror, but this was just like really not good. I did not like this. I like had a fine time getting like initially into it, but then it just like is so dense. I definitely think there are a lot of disturbing and depraved things happening here, but it's just like boring. I was bored. I didn't connect to any of the characters and didn't really care what happened to them. Like any of them. And I just feel like the author was trying so hard to sound so smart and like weave all of this symbolism and commentary into her writing and into the story, but it was just like way too much, and it was like more exhausting than thought-provoking. I was just so overwhelmed by all of this really heavy jargon, and it was like I don't have the mental capacity to even like try and figure out what the hell you're trying to say. Yeah, I was just like exhausted. I was just like, can someone just please tell me what I'm reading? I don't get it. I mean, it's not like I need an author to hold my hand throughout an entire book. I think there is something fun to be said about, you know, figuring those things out for yourself, but she just like did not give a single break, and she just kept piling it on, and it's like, we get it, you're so smart and you're a good writer, okay, cool. So yeah, I just couldn't really be bothered to decode the symbolism or the commentary that was being made. I think she was maybe saying that like humans are bad, incest is bad, and no matter how much we struggle, it doesn't matter because the earth is dead anyway. I don't know. I felt very frustrated by this book, and just sort of like, yeah, like just sort of like a want to get it over with. And then just, yeah, I'm probably going to get rid of it. I am very curious to hear what other people have to say about this book, especially people who liked it. I want to know because, man, this just like did not hit me well. So let me know what you thought if you read it. Either way, if you are wanting to buy it, I would buy the UK cover instead, because this is the US cover and it's not as cool, clearly, as the UK cover. That's my PSA. So yeah, I gave it 2 out of 5 stars, and I'm gonna be selling it to my bookstore as soon as possible. That do be everything I read in March. It was a pretty up and down month. I'm already well on my way into my April reading. It might shock you to hear that my April TBR has pretty much been completely changed, and the things that I have read are like nowhere near what I said I would read in my April TBR video, but again, we're embracing entropy. Anyway, let me know what you thought. Did you read any of these books? Have you read any of these books? What did you think? Was I too harsh? Was I not harsh enough? Let me know. Thanks for watching. Okay, I gotta go because I'm supposed to meet my friend for dinner and I'm already late. Okay, bye.